Hey, I'm Omar Sayyed. I'm the CEO of Ties.com, and I'm one of the passionate few. Dude, I absolutely love the interview with Omar. So I've been always told, and people say this on your interviews all the time. They say Omar asks really great questions, and I think you, for some reason, have a fantastic knack for it. I don't know if you've been reading a ton of psychology books. For whatever reason, you absolutely ask really thought-provoking questions. I think you know exactly where your audience wants you to go, and I think you know exactly where your speakers are in their mindset, and you get in the middle of it and you ask really thought-provoking questions. So I really had a fantastic time going through this, like my journey, retelling it with you, and I hope your audience really enjoys it. I hope you guys, if you're watching this, I hope you end up getting something out of it, and I hope you become inspired by watching my story.
Welcome to this episode of The Passionate Few. Today we get to sit down and hear the amazing story of the CEO of Ties.com, Omar Sayyed. And Omar shares with us exactly how he took the company to doing 8 figures in revenue in the tens of millions of dollars in sales annually, and exactly some of the strategies, insights, and philosophies that he's used to build the business. And also, Omar shared with me off camera how a lot of that determination was built up when he hit rock bottom because he didn't come from a family in entrepreneurship, had to deal with tons of challenges along the way, and even hit that rock bottom when he was living in a 1-bedroom apartment with his wife, and swore to himself that he would do whatever it took to make his dreams a reality. And of course, today, Omar has done exactly that. So I want to encourage you guys to sit back, relax, and enjoy this powerful interview to help you take your life, your mindset, and your business to that next level with the CEO of Ties.com, Omar Sayyed. Enjoy. Thanks for being on the show today, Omar.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You're the first Omar to have on the show, so it's awesome that we have the same name.
When I saw your name, I was like, definitely must meet. All Omars must unite.
Yes, absolutely. So let's get right into it. A lot of people know what you've done with Ties.com. Some people might not. You guys came into the space and you got involved with Ties in 2010 and took it from, a couple $1 million in revenue to multiple 8 figures in revenue, growing 30% year over year. Pretty awesome in the space. You guys are killing it. Talk to me a little bit about how you got into entrepreneurship, and then we'll get more into the business space. But talk to me about how you grew up and where did the seed get planted in entrepreneurship for you?
Sure. So coming from a background like mine, sort of immigrant parents.
What nationality?
So Afghan. And growing up with sort of like the background that I grew up in, there was no entrepreneurship, right? You either become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, and those are the only options you have. The seed got planted. Some people are just inherently sort of entrepreneurs, and so in high school, as silly as it sounds, in high school I was like slanging candy bars and water bottles.
Do the same. Yeah.
Water bottles during soccer practice. And then that just sort of morphed into my first business right after high school. And then from there, it just sort of stayed with me. I actually dropped out of college to do this. I didn't tell my parents, and my parents didn't know for the longest time. I exited my first business, and then from then, it always stuck with me, even when I went back to school, which, while I don't condone anybody else from dropping out of school, I know for me, it was just sort of a waste of time. And not only did I do that, but I also went to grad school, which I think was even a bigger mistake. But then I learned, and then I stopped going to school.
What year did you drop out?
So I'm going to date myself. In 2000, freshman year of college, I dropped out for about 3.5 years. And then when I went back, it was almost a full 4 years before I went back.
What was that like to tell your parents that you wanted to drop out? Because they're not entrepreneurs, right?
No. So I'm of the mindset, and I tell people here all the time, our team members, I tell them, ask for forgiveness and not for permission. So I knew my parents were never going to say yes to it, but I also knew that I wanted to try this. I had this really amazing opportunity. And so it wasn't so much that I told them that I wanted to drop out. It was so much that I told them that I had dropped out, which is a really different conversation.
Right.
I remember my dad
was no return.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. My dad was in the kitchen making dinner, and my mom was sitting on the couch. And I remember telling them this, and I was sort of looking for reactions. And my dad was pretty engaging, but my mom refused to even look in my direction. She was just like, it was almost like this shameful moment for her. She was like, whatever, you guys do whatever you want anyway, referring to my brother and I. So yeah, that was a pretty heartbreaking moment, but you have to have some strong convictions to do it.
So when you dropped out, did you already have a successful business? Were you kind of broke at the time trying to figure it out? I mean, what was it that gave you the confidence to drop out? Or what was that nudge or that thorn on your side?
What does
that made you do it?
Aristotle say? Foolish, right? Young at heart, and the complete sort of belief in yourself that you're going to be able to make it. But there's also this like promise of what can be, and then having the willpower to go chase it. A lot of people have these ideas of what you can be, even if it's like being a social media influencer, what you can do, but then going out to do it is a different thing.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's what it was. It was sort of like the willpower to break through it. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. And then before Ties.com, I know you had two other businesses that you were involved in. Was it around that time that you started your first business when you dropped out, or take us back to that first business? So
the way it worked out was my uncle approached me and said, "Hey, I have this opportunity. We should do it." And it wasn't a lot of thinking. It was literally a couple of dinners, and I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So that was my first business, and then about 3.5 years later, I exited and went back to school. I think it was a full 4 years before I went back to school. And it was definitely like an older kid. There's a huge difference being 22 in a class full of 18 or 19-year-olds. There's like a chasm in terms of like mentality and like emotional intelligence, experiences. I mean, even though like in my 30s, I look back, I'm like, you're still a young buck. But back then, it was huge difference. So yeah, early 20s when I first did it.
So before you exited that company, was it a successful first company?
Absolutely, yeah. So it was successful in that the revenues were fantastic, hugely profitable.
What industry was it in, or what were you guys?
Cell phone accessories. So we were one of the very first companies to import cell phone accessories into the U.S. Unfortunately, it was unsuccessful for me personally in that I didn't have the mentality to sort of like keep up with the changes. I think you're sort of hard-headed when you're younger, but I learned a lot from it in learning how to deal with family and learning how to scale a business. And there wasn't office politics, but there was family dynamic that I think was difficult for me to deal with. I still treated the business like, oh, hey, we're family members because it was my uncle. We're family. That comes first before the business does. But the truth is there's a happy medium between that. And I just couldn't get that at a young age when I was 18, 19 years old.
And then as it scaled, you had some challenges being able to manage all that, right? Because you were how old at that time?
Yeah, like 19, 20 years old.
So this is just before you dropped out, right?
And then this is time. I dropped out 6 months into it.
Gotcha, makes sense.
Yeah.
And then what, for people who are entrepreneurs and maybe dabbling into their first, entrepreneurial endeavor at any age, what did you learn from that experience that you can share with others in terms of maybe the right industry to get into, what to look out for, what's ideal when working with family partners? Like, what are some key takeaways that you can give people out there?
Yeah, I mean, there's no true panacea, but definitely understanding that it's not overnight and consistency really matters. And that's probably like the single most important thing when you're taking on any endeavor. Being consistent but also being persistent at what you're doing, and then knowing when to pivot. And I think timing matters significant, right? So you can't get into, let's say you want to start a business. I'm not discouraging anybody, but you certainly shouldn't want to get into, like an industry that's dying, right? Because if you're chasing a wave as opposed to being on top of a wave are two different things.
Right.
So definitely timing matters amongst those things. But again, the truth is, if anybody's listening to this, there is no panacea. You can't say, do this one thing and it's going to make you hugely successful. But if you're starting off early, understand that the only way you're going to be successful is being absolutely consistent and being persistent, right? Paulo Coelho, and I'm not a huge fiction reader.
Author of The Alchemist, yeah.
Author of The Alchemist, he says, sort of, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but he says, destiny is faithful to those who are sort of faithful to their dreams, and butchering this. But if you,
I love
if you,
that. Yeah, yeah.
right? Yeah,
Destiny is faithful to those that are faithful to their destiny.
exactly. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So if you're really passionate about whatever you're doing, it comes from somewhere, and it has to start with consistency and persistence, and not having that. Doing something for 3 months, 6 months, 8 months is not enough. I have people, who have been doing something for 7 weeks or 7 months, and they're like, "Oh, hey, like this isn't working for me."
Right.
And you're like, "Yeah, you've been doing it for 7 months. Try like 10 years, and if it doesn't work, then you can say no." I mean, again, there's a fine
patience in the long haul.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then how did you translate those lessons to the second business before getting involved with Ties, which is the third entrepreneurial endeavor?
Yeah.
So how did you transition those lessons into business number 2?
So I brought about a lot of emotional intelligence. I realized learning how to read people, and knowing that you can get a lot more done by being less emotional and more sort of effective in your communication. I think that really, really helped. Yeah. Communication is very, very key when it comes to, especially when you're like in an early stage, and we were a very early stage. So I think that's probably like the single most important thing that I carried over. And then other than sort of like understanding supply chain, that stuff didn't really translate over because the second business was ostensibly marketing arbitrage. So that didn't really translate over other than just sort of people skills, because we were scaling up a team.
So marketing arbitrage, meaning that second business consisted of you guys helping get traffic and market traffic to vendors of products, right?
Exactly.
In the jewelry space with...
Yeah, so it was in the jewelry space. We were, this is before CallWave was around or any other apps that could sort of measure foot traffic in any significant way. But we were, driving traffic to physical stores.
So companies are paying you a monthly retainer to drive traffic to their stores.
Yeah.
And then I believe there was an acquisition of
There's
this company.
there's an acquisition of that, and we talked a little bit about this earlier.
Yes.
More of a hostile takeover. We just didn't know any better.
Yes.
But yeah, so the acquisition happened
By an interesting company as well.
By an interesting company, yes, a much larger company. But I had already exited when this was happening, so I was in grad school while the talks had started, and I was writing, sort of a dissertation, and I was getting ready for yet another grad school. So I was in this really busy period, and my trigger was when the talks would start for an acquisition, then I would exit the business. And so that was my trigger. And as soon as it happened, I exited. And then they saw it through the full exit 6 months after I had left.
Gotcha. So was your plan when you got into that second business to create something for acquisition, or was it to build it to run?
Yeah.
So you went into the business starting building something that you're then going to sell.
Yeah, and there was even further than that. I knew that we were building towards an exit strategy, which is not always the best way to build a business, but we knew we were building for an exit. And then ancillary to that, I knew personally that I was building to pay off school debt. So that's what it really was for me personally.
And how old were you at that time on the second business?
24, 25 when we were exiting, yeah.
And both of those were fairly successful, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. That's pretty interesting, because a lot of people are sort of riddled with failure their first couple of years. Can you talk to me a little bit about the tough times? Like, now we know about the good ones, but talk to me about some of those sleepless nights, what those were like.
So the truth is that, hearing these short bylines of success stories makes you feel like, oh, that's the way it ought to be, right?
Right.
And social media perpetuates that, because you're constantly inundated. When you look at your Facebook feed, when you're looking at your Instagram wall, you're constantly inundated by good news. And so you
success, winning,
exactly, and you think everyone's crushing it, right? Like so-and-so just bought a Lamborghini, and so-and-so is flying on a private jet, and so-and-so just posted these numbers from their business. But the truth is that there's so many sleepless nights, blood, sweat, and tears that goes into building those success stories. So yeah, absolutely. Like many, many nights of turmoil. And what it really comes down to, and if your listeners are engaged at this point in the interview, I hope I haven't put anybody to sleep.
No, not at all. This is really good.
But, understand that those are parts of the journey, like having those sleepless nights, being worried about money, being worried about whether or not you can pay rent, being worried about whether or not you can put food on the table, those are the stories that like sort of shape you and shape your sort of understanding of your business. It helps you appreciate the better times. But yeah, many sleepless nights, many arduous nights. I remember with that second business, we got hit by a Google penalty. I don't know if anybody has heard of it, but Google 900 is a pretty massive penalty, but they basically wipe you off of the search engine.
Wow.
And somebody at Google has to literally target you to shut you down.
What was it that flagged that? Do you know?
Very aggressive marketing tactics.
Gotcha. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, and that was early days of SEO.
Can you talk a little bit about it for people that might be curious? Just sort of, was it guerrilla marketing, wild claim?
So yeah, we were, there were like no rules. It was the wild west of SEO. So you just did whatever you wanted to, right? And then at one point Google was like, wait, what are you doing? No, that can't happen.
Yeah. Goes back to the forgiveness versus a permission thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And while I wasn't in charge of marketing, what our marketing director at the time had decided was that they were going to keyword stuff the website. And, like anybody who, even like a 7-year-old will tell you now, you never do that. But back then we just didn't, we thought this was a great idea. Yeah. And honestly, it helped. It was like boosting of traffic. Overnight, we were watching massive traffic come in. But, at some point, Google's like, wait, what are you doing?
Right.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's just manipulating the sort of keywords on your site. There was a lot of aggressive on-page SEO tactics that penalized us. Yeah.
Nice. And then talk to me about how you got involved with Ties.com. Now you're the CEO and co-founder. So talk to me about how the evolution of those two businesses ultimately led to where we're at today at this company that you turned around.
So right after grad school, I decided that I didn't want to go on to law school, and that wasn't for me. And it's a separate story of how I got talked out of going to law school.
Let's hear it.
You really?
Let's hear it. There might be someone listening right now that might be on the fence about where they're pursuing.
Sure.
So it might speak to them.
I had a friend who had exited his business. He had sold it to Google. Very, very successful. And they were about 10 to 12 years older than I was at the time. I was in my mid-20s, and house in Beverly Hills, and, parties all the time. And this was a summer, and, and law school was just sort of like this thing. And there was a guy that would come out and party with them, and he was a friend of a friend. And at one point, I'd found out that he worked at Latham Watkins, which was the firm that I wanted to work for. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to do mergers and acquisitions, and that was my deal. And I watched a father who had a briefcase and a suit every single day, so that's what I wanted to do.
Right.
And he sat me down one night. He goes, "Why do you want to become a lawyer?" And I told him the story, the sort of elevator spiel about how I want to help people, but really, I want to also make money, because that's the truth, right? That's what you want to do. You want to make money, but you also, it's this like, it's this way for you to get power without necessarily running for office. And so I really wanted to do that. And you watch all these like law movies, and you really want to become a lawyer. And he sat me down and he said, "Listen, this is what's going to happen. You're going to work for the first 5 years as like an underling, right? And
an apprentice or something."
Exactly. And after you've done law school, you're going to work for 5 years. And if you're lucky, somebody's going to come up to you and say, "Hey, you're on partnership track." And then you work for another 5 years. He goes, as a side note, if you don't get picked, if they don't hire you, you pick up and go somewhere else and start as a freshman again, or you start your own law firm. So let's just say best case scenario, somebody chooses you. Then you're working in an additional 5 years before you sort of go through the ranks, junior partner, then senior partner. The senior partnership comes
So now you're hearing, oh man, it's going to take a decade. I don't even know if I want this. It's taking so long. My friend's in Beverly Hills.
Sure. Yeah. And then he goes, then they come on, and let's just say you become a senior partner. Most firms are like, "Hey, buy-in, buddy. I need a check for $500,000. I need a check for $750,000. He goes, let's just say you've saved money, or if you haven't, you're going to go finance because you want to be a partner at this firm.
Right.
And now you're a partner, and he goes, been through at least one divorce, if not two. But, you play the guitar now, you drive a Porsche, and you're living life. And he goes, Monday morning, you walk into the office, sort of strolling in, and he's like, your assistant or your paralegal runs to you and says, "Hey, you got a 9 o'clock waiting for you in the conference room." So you sort of shuffle your way to your office, you leave your stuff, you grab your coffee, you run into a conference room, and you notice that there's like a 25-year-old, and like at 45, you're going through the process, and for a $10,000 retainer for $1,000 an hour, now you work for him or her. And I heard the story and I was like, man, I don't want to do this.
Right.
But what's cool about this story is about 2 years later, almost exactly, we were setting up phantom equity for our team here. And so we were setting up this options plan, and I called him up and I said, hey, we want to do this. The same guy who had told me the story years earlier. He said, yeah, no problem. Actually, this is 4 years later. Exactly, almost.
So he got to see you on both sides of the fence. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I call him up. I'm like, hey, I want to do this. And he goes, yeah, I'm not at Latham Watkins, but I'm at this other firm, also a downtown firm. No problem. My business partner and I drove out there, and he came and met us in the lobby. We walked upstairs on a Monday morning at 9 a.m. We're sitting in the conference room. The senior partner that's supposed to come out and talk to us is running a little bit late. He comes in holding his coffee, white hair, happens to play in a band, plays the guitar, happens to be driving a Porsche.
Wow.
Tells us sort of how he's going to do this and lays out this plan for us, and then hands us over an engagement letter, which I signed, cut him a check for $10,000. And he walks me down to the lobby. He says, do you remember that story that I told you?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. So it came back full story. So for $1,000 an hour, this guy was working for me. And it was like, and honestly, the truth is that at like 9 p.m. sometimes I would text him and say, hey, we want to change this one verbiage here. And he'd be like, no problem. He would literally text me back. And so.
Wow. Yeah. So you got to see it come to fruition on the other side.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you'd say you made the right choice.
I made the right choice. Yeah.
Okay. And then how do we get into specifically ties.com, which is what you're known for now?
Sure. Yes. So we took a little bit of a detour. So I ended up meeting my now business partners. I can't quite recall where, but I ended up meeting them, and they were telling me about some of their challenges. But I knew automatically when they told me ties.com, I was like, man, what a fantastic 4-letter domain.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I sort of looked at the site, and it looked really great, sort of like background, but it needed, the next iteration of it. And they were having scaling issues. They just sort of had homegrown. The business had been homegrown.
So you came and took it over. It was already sort of existing.
Yes.
You guys came in and sort of revamped it.
Exactly.
And this was 2010?
2010.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And this is right after. So I shut down my consulting company. So after my second business, I sort of fell into consulting, not because I wanted to, but that's just how it happens. So for 2 years I did that, and then I came across my business partners, and then we pivoted ties.com and built it into what it is today since then.
Beautiful. And then quick question. I noticed a recurring theme in your story is network, constant network. You weren't born to parents who were entrepreneurs or born in any sort of advantageous network of a society. So can you talk a little bit how important networking is and what you found to be effective from doing it?
I've watched a bunch of your interviews, and almost everyone says Omar knows how to ask interview questions. You really do.
Yeah. Thank you.
They have an knack for it.
Thanks.
Social capital. That's what it comes down to. So the word you're looking for is social capital, or rather the phrase. I have none. When you grow up with immigrant parents, and my parents have immigrated 3 times now. You don't have that, right? Like you don't have, and I don't. People who do, this is in no way a shot at them. Good for them. They weren't. It's not their fault that they were born into it. I'm happy for them, but I know that I can't pick up my phone and call my dad and say, "Hey, can you make an introduction to so and so?"
Right.
But I know I have friends whose parents are pretty powerful, or they have access.
Connections influence something. Yeah.
Something, right? And I don't have that. And I look at our friends now, and I think about like my children and my friends' children, right? They can call one of us at any time, and they have all of a sudden all this access, right? And your future kids. But the truth is that I didn't have that, and so social capital is a big deal. And so no, I didn't have that. And for me, it wasn't just networking in sort of like the business sense, and especially in Orange County, because that's sort of a dirty word around here.
Right. It's
Dirty
like
phrase.
a taboo. It's informal. It's very impersonal.
Yeah, and it's all about like money, or it's all about sort of what can you do for me next,
exactly,
right?
instead of just building friends.
Exactly.
Building relationships.
And so for me, honestly, like it's very naive. It was just trying to learn. I genuinely, like even now, I think some people just either think I'm stupid or people think I don't, like I'm super naive, right?
Right.
But whenever I meet somebody, I don't care what their intentions are. I really try to learn from people. I'll ask them a ton of questions. I'm sure that I've like, even most recently, I was in the middle of this transaction, and I'm sure that guy walked away and was like, man, what an asshole. Like asshole isn't, what a dum-dum.
Right.
But the truth was I really wanted to learn about him and his business and how he like built a company and, how he scaled it and how it went public. But, I'm just curious by nature. But because I didn't have social capital and I may have not recognized that it was referred to as social capital, I knew that I lacked something and I had to make up for it.
So how did you go about doing that? Or what practical steps would you give somebody who's in your situation, maybe at any age? They don't have to be, in their 20s, they could be in their 30s, 40s, 50s, trying to do it on their own, maybe not having the right person in their ears, maybe not having good examples of successful entrepreneurs. What would be your best advice for people to go out into the world and try to get something, try to make connections?
Yeah, don't ostracize yourself. And we talked a little bit about this. I spent the first 6 to 8 years of my life building this business, really focusing on our process, SOPs, the infrastructure, people. That was really important for me. And of course, that's important. But networking, going to meetup groups, meeting other entrepreneurs that are similar like you. And not everyone's going to be a 10 out of 10 for you.
Right.
And while somebody might be a 10 out of 10 for you now, they may not be 6 months from now or 8 months from now. But learning from people who are where you want to be is really, really important.
Have you found that sorry to interject, but I'm curious, as a CEO, I'm sure you meet a lot of other CEOs of major organizations. Have you found a common denominator among the most effective CEOs, being one yourself, being in those circles? Have you noticed patterns that people on the outside might think like, oh, CEOs are all knowing, but then you meet a bunch of CEOs and go, oh, wow, they ask a lot of more questions than these other know-it-all lower
absolutely.
on the totem pole guys.
Two things. Curiosity, right? And this like unwavering willingness to listen to any idea. And sometimes I accuse myself that I don't think I'm open-minded enough. But absolutely. So that's sort of a key to a lot of... The more successful people I meet, the more open they are about ideas, opportunities, people. And then ancillary to that or secondary to that, probably equally as important, is strong conviction. If you believe in something enough, it doesn't matter what sort of like the popular opinion is. It doesn't matter what your friends think. It doesn't matter what your family thinks. If you're if you believe in something, and you have to have the conviction to go chase it. And then, of course, the sort of like tertiary thing is, and not every CEO has it, but having the charm to get the people to believe in your vision.
Right, yeah. And that's one thing you talk about, and we'll get into sort of how you scaled Ties.com to do 30% year over year. I think over 160% growth since you got involved with it as CEO. Can you talk a little bit about, something you mentioned off camera about creating a culture with your team of that North Star?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that and how integral that's been to the economic growth of Ties.com.
Yeah, so it always helps to get people on the same page, right? And get people to believe in a vision. But then, and that's something absolutely that we do here. But at the same time, like you have to give them instructions. It's to say like, hey, by the way, we all need to row in this direction. That's one thing. The other thing is also tell them how to row, right? Or why it's important to row. So that's something that we work with. And so our North Star, one of the things that we ask everyone here to always have in the back of their head is, does this help us grow? So if they're sitting in bed at night, or they're driving to work, or they're sitting in a meeting and an idea pops up, right? And I absolutely encourage autonomous thinking here. I like to stay out of people's way. I don't like to manage people. So if they come up with an idea and they want to implement it, the number one question they have to ask themselves is, does this help us grow?
Revenue-wise.
Revenue-wise, that's what we focus on. And it's not always revenue. If in charge of like social media, it's not necessarily revenue,
Right.
it's different metrics.
It's engagement, likes,
Sure.
all those.
Yeah. But the question you always have to ask yourself is, does this help us grow? And so in meetings, whether I'm in them or not, that's the one thing that people always are guided by is, does this help us grow? So that's sort of one of the things that we focus on. But what you're referring to in terms of our culture, we early on decided that we were going to focus on our team and provide an atmosphere for them that they felt that they could have autonomy. They felt that their voice could be heard. They felt that they could make things happen in this company without necessarily having repercussions if it didn't go the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was important. And the idea behind this is if you take care of your people and you give them autonomy so they can become leaders or so that they can act like leaders, then they will produce great bodies of work, great products. They'll produce great content. They'll produce great designs. They'll produce great UI, UX, whatever it is. They become the best at what they do. And through those products that are created, through that services that are created, then you take care of your customers. Not that the customers are coming last. It's that because the base is there, the customers are naturally taken care of. Because the truth is that if I empower my customer service agents, if I empower our logistics teams, the people who touch the product as a last attribution, they will produce packages, they will produce customer service experiences that ultimately creates this really great experience for our customers. And if a customer has a problem, that they get dealt with right away and that their issue is resolved. So the customer inherently gets taken care of.
Now, this is only in the context of hiring the right people to begin with, right? Because I'm sure there's a lot of organizations where, executives at any level will micromanage thinking, that the person might not be able to do the best job themselves, or maybe they're not following protocol or stuff like that. So how important have you found it is to recruit the right people to begin with?
Sure.
When giving that sort of freedom, right?
So, and we can talk about sort of what my role here is if you're interested, but yes, hiring the right people is really important. So Jack Welch, who considers himself one of the most prolific recruiters in the world, right? He says that from his best estimation, the average recruiter sort of has a 50-50 shot at hiring the right person. And as a side note, the wrong hire can cost you 3 times their salary. So if you're hiring somebody at $100,000 and they happen to be the wrong hire, they can cost you $300,000 in business.
Right.
So Jack Welch says, I'm at a 70% sort of pass-fail rate. 70%, I hire the right people. The key is that not to get it wrong 50% of the time or 30% of the time. The key is to let those people go immediately as soon as you realize that they are the wrong people.
Something Netflix adopts as well. I know Netflix is big on that.
Yeah, because ultimately the people drive your culture, right? Culture isn't something that you write down on a wiki and you hope it sort of gets followed, right?
Yeah.
And you publish papers about it. Culture is the people that come into it and how much they perpetuate the culture and how much they believe it and how much they buy into it. So for us, absolutely. Hiring the right people is really important. And then whenever we go through a recruiting, like right now, for instance, we're hiring, I think 4 new people. It doesn't matter who we're hiring. You can be an executive level, then to entry level, a nascent graduate through experience. It doesn't matter. The process is always the same. We want you to be here as much as we, let me rephrase that. If we want you to be here, you have to equally as much want to be here. So I hope I said that right. But it's a symbiotic relationship. It's not just you being here and then us making a decision or us wanting you to be here and you making a decision. We want you to walk in through these doors with eyes wide open, understanding the culture that you're walking into. And so for us, culture fit is very, very important. You can hire people, and we've made these mistakes, hiring people who have the right skill set, but don't fit into the culture. It changes the dynamic of your business. And then as overall, what ends up happening is effectiveness goes down, your efficiency goes down because the right culture isn't being sort of propagated.
Perpetuated.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's little by little gets watered down.
Yes. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And if you don't monitor it day to day, it can subtly get watered down to the point where you look down in a couple of months and go, what the hell happened?
Yeah. And then people start missing work because they're not, they don't feel like they're part of the culture anymore because you're now bringing in new people. So yeah, absolutely. Culture is very, very important.
Are there any rules of thumb that you have for hiring? Any particular things that you advise other entrepreneurs to look for aside from anything you mentioned?
So you have to make a determination whether you want what you're focused on, for instance, right? So the number one question that you have to answer yourself is whether or not you're building a business for a lifestyle business, or you're building a business towards an exit, because those are inherently two different businesses. And if I was building a revenue-based business that I was looking to exit from in 3 years, then I would have a different mindset about how I was building the team and who I was going to bring. Exactly. So those are sort of like questions that has to inform your decision-making process when you're hiring. But for me, for instance, I place equal amount of importance on emotional intelligence that I do on IQ. So EQ and IQ balance for me is very, very important.
So how do you test that in practical application? In interviews, or is there types of questions?
Yeah.
Or what is it?
So I have a few very specific questions that I ask even before somebody walks in through the door. So for instance, I'll ask, I don't know if people are watching this now, they can have a cheat sheet. I'll ask, what is the one thing that you've accomplished that you're proud of? Because an A player, if they're walking through my doors, they've accomplished something that they're proud of.
Right.
And if you're a nascent graduate, it could be something like, oh, I just graduated, summa cum laude. Or if you're a couple of years into it, like I crushed this one campaign, right? But an A player always has something that they can talk about.
Right.
And you want somebody who's proud enough to be able to say it and has the self-esteem to be able to say it.
Confidence. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Right.
Because then they're going to translate that to your business if they're a part of it. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Right. And then immediately I follow that up with, what is one thing that's that you're not good at? And I ask that hoping for two answers at the same time. So the first part is that you're introspective enough to be able to say, oh, I'm not good at, whatever. I'm not good at, I'm really not good at email, right? Or I'm not really good at social media, whatever it is, right? Everybody has these flaws. But that you're introspective enough that you're capable of recognizing, I'm not good at this. I'm not good at returning my mother's phone calls, whatever it is, right?
Right.
There's one thing that you're not.
Yeah. What if they say I'm not good at being on time?
That could be, right? That could be.
Yeah.
But then the other thing that I watch for that I don't ask about, this is sort of a cheat sheet, is whether or not they can say, let's use your example, I'm not good at being on time, that they're doing something about it. I'm not really good at scheduling my time, but I now put everything on the calendar and I set timers for myself. That's one thing I'm doing to improve this. Then I know, okay, so they're introspective enough that they have recognized that they're not good at something, but then they've taken a step towards fixing that, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
And that's important because an A player knows their weakness and then has done something about it. Mm-hmm. Right? It's one thing to recognize it, because a lot of people don't even recognize, but it's one thing to recognize and it's another thing to do something about it. You're taking actionable tasks to sort of remedy that.
Yeah, you're taking initiative and you're seeing it in them.
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. So before we get into the actual business and how you grew, I have one last question. It's a personal curiosity.
Yeah.
So as you grow your team, how big is your team at Ties.com roughly?
Yeah, so we're 28 people in-house and then 33 overseas.
So the millions of ties you guys have sold, 28 people run the whole show.
We fluctuated in numbers, but yes. Yeah, we hover like.
Wow, that's pretty incredible.
Yes.
So my question is, as it comes to growing, I'm sure you have so many decisions that need to be made all the time. You talk a lot about the importance of sort of letting go and trusting your people. How often do you run into situations where maybe designs are made that you normally wouldn't have approved, but you sort of don't want to slow down the process of growth, where you have to let things go? Not that they're not excellent quality or excellent designs, but how do you sort of handle that when you have so many things happening and you kind of have to let go of maybe designs that you wouldn't normally let go of, or things like that.
Yeah.
What's your thought process on that?
So I learned that the hard way when it comes to creative works, whether it's content or designs. Two things: you're not designing for yourselves, right? Like this,
Right? Yeah.
and you have to like realize that very, very early on. We had somebody on our production team that would say, she would walk into my office and she would say, "Omar, we're not designing for you. This is not your closet, and America's a big country. The truth is, truth is, you have no idea what design is going to work and what's not, right? And because we have such a large variety of products, I learned that the hard way, and so I don't get involved in that process. And yeah, there's definitely times where I'm like, oh boy, that's what we're gonna. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
But the truth is that we've looked at stuff where we're like, oh man, really?
Yeah.
And then that just kills it. And then other stuff that you're super excited about does nothing. You're like, wait, what just happened, right? Because it's so subjective, this idea of like, oh, this is going to kill it, right?
Or nitpicking it to perfection. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Reid Hoffman, if what he says about waiting for something to be perfect. And there's designers that, like Ralph Lauren, who are true sort of like clothiers, and they're designers, and Vera Wang, Tom Ford, who like design products because it's after their own self-image, or they're really truly designing stuff that they're passionate about. But for us, because we have a design team, I make sure that I stay out of their way because they have the autonomy to do so. So that's number one. So understanding that you're not only designing for yourself, but you're designing for a much, much larger audience. And then the second thing is, like I said, you have no idea what's going to be successful and what's not when you're designing for such a large audience. So it behooves you to stay out of the way. And so that's the sort of like process I take now. And then the other thing is that, like, obviously you've hired people who are good at what they do. So why would you start dictating their process?
That makes sense. Yeah.
Because on that level, then I can get involved with everything, right? I can tell our accountants how to do their job, and I can tell the marketing team exactly what I'd like to push. But
makes sense. Yeah. It's like the expression says, if you wait for perfection, you waited too long.
Yes.
That makes total sense. Yeah. Okay. So now let's get into Ties.com. When you came into it, they were at $2 million in revenue. What were some of the challenges that they were facing at that time that you came in and sort of turned it around at?
Yeah. So a lot of things, stale culture. They had people on the team who absolutely believed social media was a fad. So there was sort of a cultural shift that needed to happen in terms of mentality about business. But also there was a lot of complacency. They had really, because Ties.com was such a powerful domain, and back then Google had done such a great job of giving credit towards exact match domains. So there was a lot of complacency. And then there was a staleness in the product line itself. While the market was shifting, the company was really caught flat-footed on a lot of fronts, not just marketing, but also product, design, inventory.
Were they in lead in market share? I know you guys are now, obviously, in Ties.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then you guys still were as well.
Yeah, so they were, what had happened was they were an 800-pound gorilla. And when the market shifted, they weren't the 800-pound gorilla, but they weren't recognizing it, and B, and that's sort of like the insidious part of it, right? Because you still think you have this illusion that you're still the biggest.
Right.
But that wasn't happening. And then the other part was like, oh, hey, by the way, we're hemorrhaging cash here. So then that's sort of like where I came in. I was like, okay, well, let's regroup and figure out what we need to focus on.
So what were some of the other major challenges that you faced when you sort of came into Ties and they were sort of stuck, aside from what you mentioned?
Yeah. So aside from the stagnant culture, it was just the people itself also. I think people just go into like self-preservation. And also when I came on board, I was 26 years old. I was by far the youngest person in here.
You came on as CEO?
I came on as COO.
COO, okay.
But de facto, my now business partner, Morgan, he, I give him a lot of credit because, so both my business partners are a little bit older, and especially Morgan, he's 12 years older. But the truth was that like a 26-year-old comes in and he's like, here's my life's work, good luck, So he believed in me enough to say, look, we've tried it this way and we're hitting scalability issues. We're sort of plateauing. We're going to do whatever he says. And the truth was, I know now that people used to walk into his office and be like, yo, what is this guy doing? He's just a 26-year-old. He's only going to be here at most like 2 years and he's going to leave us.
Right.
All this work we've done, we're going to throw it out the window for just this kid with some like ideas about content.
Right. Yeah.
And so like my business partner was like, yeah, like you're going to do this or like this isn't going to be the right opportunity for you.
And the trust was built because they had seen what you did in your businesses prior, or where was
no,
that trust
like
built?
honestly, no. Truth be told, I don't think they researched me much. And back then, like there was no like, God, I'm gonna date myself. There was like no LinkedIn, right? Like I'm in my exactly my mid-30s, and so yeah, like there wasn't like they could do a lot of, but there was also just a lot of like faith and
rapport,
trusting
trust,
your good
experience, yeah.
Trusting in your gut feelings, and my business partner is all about gut feelings, and that's something I've learned from him is learning to trust my own gut feeling. Whenever something doesn't feel right, that you don't do it, and if something does feel right, even though the numbers don't prove it, you do it anyway.
So you have found that to be advantageous when you're in decisions where other executives or team members, lots of, obviously it's a multi-million-dollar business, so millions of dollars are involved. You found that trusting your gut does indeed most of the time end up working in your favor, or not always?
I think it can be your sole sort of strategy.
Right, yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Like you can't just like
meditate your way.
Exactly, yeah. You can't just be like, my gut says that's good, right? Drink and drive, it's good. My gut says we're going to be fine.
Yeah.
No, so I think there are certain occasions where if you're, going back and forth on the decision, if your gut says something, that it's usually the right decision. Learning to trust your gut, and especially if you're like consistently sort of right about, internally. I always make an internal decision, which is not public at all. Like I don't even tell my wife about it. It's something. And then if the decision is that way, that's how you sort of like learn to trust your gut, later on. In fact, this transaction that I was recently doing, something about that whole process told me that I shouldn't do it. And, even though we were very close to signing paperwork, I pulled out last minute and I think it was the right decision. Time will tell, but I'm pretty sure it was the right decision.
Nice.
But I pulled away from it. But yeah, so this 26-year-old all of a sudden comes in and you have your life work handed to you. So some of the challenges were, it was just people where they were like, hey, what is this kid telling us to do? Like I would get referred to as a kid during conferences.
Was there any point, a time where you stepped in as CEO and like part of you was like, what the hell? Like how the hell did I end up as CEO of this big organization? I'm 26, all these people. I have no idea what I'm doing, but let me just act like I know what I'm doing. Was there any of that sort of dialogue going on?
So I think it's only human. to err is only human, right? I would drive home and I would have many nights where I would really ponder my decisions. And the truth is, when you have emotional investment in a business, and at the time it wasn't just my business, right? I earned sweat equity into this business, but I owned it. I owned the process. And so, and I think once that's recognized by your partners or your business partners, I think that sort of empowers you. But absolutely, there are days where I would go home and I knew, and at the time and even now, obviously, with people who have mortgages, with people who are paying for their children's school, people have car payments, insurance, they have real responsibilities.
Right.
And the sole decisions that you make as in leadership has massive consequences for them. Whether it's a market, you're doing something in the marketplace, or you're making a decision on their behalf, it affects their happiness. It affects their possibly their income. So yeah, absolutely. I would go home and I would think to myself, like, man, Omar, I cannot tell you how many nights I would not go to sleep. And I would and it wasn't necessarily anxiety. Maybe it was like stupidity that I wasn't anxious, but it was just this sheer fear of like making the wrong decision. But at the end of the day, again, believing in your convictions, but being consistent and being persistent in what you're pushing out.
What about in those times where you didn't know what the right move was and there wasn't precedent? As a leader in your space, I'm sure you're faced with challenges that, there's nobody else you can look at and say, what did they do? What have you found to be your go-to decision-making tactics? Obviously, there's no perfect formula.
Sure.
But does it go back to the gut thing? I mean, what's your sort of North Star on decision-making in general?
So I'm a very numbers-driven guy. So there's a lot of like analysis that goes behind it. And
so ROI is a big portion of...
Yeah, so the way I look at ROI is ROI is after the fact, right? Like you throw something up against the wall and you sort of measure it. And if it and if it works, you scale.
Right. Cause
and
and effect.
repeat. Right. But, initially, even when you're moving into a new business unit or like making a decision, you do sort of analysis, market analysis, timing, you see what other people are doing. So there's no perfect algorithm, but there are things that you can do. So for instance, let's just say you want to start a shoe business. Let's find out sort of like competitive analysis. Let's find out what's happening in the marketplace. Who's doing it? What are people doing it? Are bespoke shoes a thing? And if they are, how many people are doing it? How do I differentiate myself? And, the world of business has become a lot more competitive, easier to enter and a lot more competitive, therefore.
Right.
So,
especially in the e-commerce space.
Yeah. With drop shipping and what I consider marketing arbitrage. But yeah, so doing some analysis beforehand is sort of like my go-to guide when it comes to anything. And then now I'm lucky enough to have great analysts, great people who are behind the scenes who, all throw up an idea about a pivot or, and pivot is not really the right word for it, but even just a move. I'll say, hey, we want to do this. Does this make sense? Can we do this? Is this profitable? Is this going to be profitable? And you sort of look at data points. You look at sort of what the competition is doing, if there's competition, what the marketplace would do. And then the other thing is that now that we have such a large base of customers, so we have a core group of people that we trust, and over the years have become evangelizers based on our product, and they're a combination of customers to influencers that we literally will send them to test products and say, hey, tell us what you think about this. I don't care if it's an alarm clock, but I wanted to see that. Hey,
right,
like all of our Guap Box items, for instance, we'll send them to them first and say, what do you think of this? Would you, like, if we did this, would you care for it? Because we just don't want to throw a product in the box that if like one of our people wouldn't carry it. And it's large enough to now where we can get a decent sample of answers to where we can make a decision based on that.
Nice. And then in terms of specific things that you think are responsible for the growth, I'm sure there was a lot of things responsible for the growth of the company. But what would you say were some of the key factors that were responsible for you? Because you didn't just grow the company 30% 1 year.
Sure.
You did it year over year over year over year, which proves that it's not luck, it's a strategy.
Yeah.
What were some of the specific tangible strategies that you found were effective? I know social media, like we said, the millions of views. You guys put up tie videos on how to fold a tie.
Right.
What were some of those key things that made that shift for you guys year over year?
Yeah, simply put, two things: people and then content. People are really important because if you don't have the right team, you're never going to be able to build the right content. And we really source content in-house. So, and the second part of our growth really has been creating good content for people to gravitate towards. So our goal isn't first point attribution, meaning you're going to see an ad and convert. Look, that happens. Great. And we applaud ourselves. We pat ourselves on the back. There's an ROI that measures it, and we have KPIs for that. Great. But my strategy isn't that. My strategy is that you're going to find out about ties.com or Guapbox through somewhere, right? Whether it's social media or a piece of content that you have found, whether it's our content about how to tie a tie, or whether it is a piece of content that you're reading on how to cut hair for men, whether it's, some piece of content about what to wear on the beach, whatever it is, right? You're going to find this piece of content on our blog or somewhere that we've attributed to, and you're going to recognize ties.com as a company, and then you're going to come back to it later and say, when I'm ready, I'm going to shop. And so my goal isn't like first point attribution. And you may not be able to sort of do that initially, because then if you're launching a business, you want to make money right away.
Cash flow, yeah.
But you need to focus on a long-term strategy. And especially if you're not building a business for an exit. Remember, we talked about arbitrary metrics versus metrics that really matter. So for me, engagement is important, not from the aspect that I like myself patted on the back, but the engagement points are important because it lets me know that, hey, we're producing content that people really like. And at some point, they're going to share it again with somebody else.
So when you talk about e-commerce, right, a lot of people are coming into the space. There's a lot of options like Shopify. People are creating, Amazon FBA, right? People have all this stuff they're doing online. What have you found it truly takes to build a successful e-commerce business in this digital age? It's super saturated. What are some key components? Is it just driving traffic? Is it credibility? Is it product? I'm sure it's all of the above to some degree. What would be your best advice to somebody starting an e-commerce business on what it takes to build something big?
Yeah. So if your listeners have stuck around for this long, what really matters is your personal story. Like for me, for instance, I came from humble beginnings, and so I share that as much as possible whenever I do awesome projects like this, or if I'm interviewed, because that people tend to relate to that.
Right.
And so for us, that was early on. That was really important, is to share our story. Where my business partner Morgan started the business from literally his 2-bedroom condo in Arizona.
He bought the ties.com domain.
Years later. Years later.
Do you know how much the domain was? Like, very curious.
Definitely into the 7 figures.
Yeah. It's got to be an expensive domain. Yes.
Yeah. It was an expensive acquisition. But sharing those stories were early on really important. But then people believe in your story for so long. What really is going to come down to is your product. So I advise for people right now, and I don't do it for the money. I basically do it because they're young entrepreneurs and I believe in them. I believe in them more than I believe in their product. Let's just put it this way.
Right.
But the one thing I emphasize on them, it doesn't matter whether you're creating a digital product or you're creating a physical product, it doesn't matter, or a service, it doesn't matter what it is. What people really care about at the end of the day, once they've bought you or they've bought into your story, what really matters is the product itself. So I have people that I advise who are really, really good, for instance, at marketing, really good at marketing. And that's their sort of advantage, right? So in the world of business, as a side note, and we'll come back to your question, as a side note, in the world of business, you either have to have a combination of 2 of these 3 things: product, market, timing, right? Like you have to have something of this, of 2 of these 3 things. So one of the guys, he's a young kid, 20 years old. He's really, really good at user acquisition. That's what he's really, really good at. But what he significantly lacks is a stable product. And that's the one thing I keep telling him about. I'm like, listen, this is great. I'm happy that you know how to acquire users. In fact, many companies spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, at trying to figure out what it is that you do. That's your magic. You figure this out. For whatever reason, you figure this out. But driving this traffic doesn't do anything for you if your product is shit, if your product doesn't work. So at the end of the day, what it really comes down to, once they get over this, is whether or not your product is good. And that's what we really focused on, is creating good products for the price that you pay, so that way you don't feel cheated, that you feel that you're getting a great product. And ultimately, what do you want to be known for? If you don't have a good product, then you can acquire all the users that you want, but they're never going to come back to you, right? It's a lot more expensive to acquire new users than it is for you to re-up on the users that you have, or sell to, remarket to the people that you already have. So if you've sold them once and you've sold them a shit product, they're never going to come back and buy from you again. And you may have ruined your reputation for them for life. Because there are people, I'm sure you've bought stuff and you've been at companies where you're like, no, man, I'm never going back to that. Right. So
you're saying it's sort of 3-part. One, you got to have a story. One, you got to have traffic. But number 3, you can't close any of that if it doesn't convert to a quality product sale.
Yes. Yeah.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Now, as it comes to the growing pains of the company, I'm sure there's many.
Yeah.
What have been some of the most challenging, maybe things you haven't shared before that just really squeezed you, and how did you come out of those situations? Maybe you're still in one of those situations right now.
Yeah.
What's something maybe you haven't shared before that you feel would be helpful for people to learn? We go deep with the questions.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. I don't know if this is sort of personal for me. Family. I just picked up a phone call from my dad. My mom and dad have been fantastic fixtures in my life. Very supportive.
And they didn't believe in you in the beginning, right?
No.
And so now the song has.
I think it's not. It's not that they didn't believe in me. It's just that they felt that this was such a long shot. Why take a risk at entrepreneurship when you can just go be a lawyer and work for somebody, or where you can become an engineer and go work for somebody, and you can become a professor and go teach somewhere, right? You don't have to be worried about whether or not you're going to be able to pay bills or pay payroll or do that kind of stuff, right? So this added stress is not necessarily needed in your life. I remember early on, my mom and dad, they would call me at like 5 or 6 o'clock and be like, "Hey, you're not home yet." Like, "Yeah, I'm working." They're like, "Why? It's 5 o'clock. Come home." Like what are you working for? And it was up to a couple of years till they still they would give me a hard time about it. And it took a lot out of me to not necessarily convince, but just to not listen to that constant, almost negativity about what it is I'm doing about in my life and how I should have done something else, or how I still can go do something else, and why am I doing this? And that only exacerbates the problems that you have in the office, right? So like whatever challenges you have in the office, and then you go home and you do, it just makes it that much more tougher. And so you have to be that much more resilient. And these are the people who love you, right? And we talked about Andy Frisell a little bit. And you think to yourself, like, wait, why am I going to listen to you? Like, you haven't accomplished this, right? And I love my parents. They're hardworking people, but they've never been entrepreneurs. They haven't accomplished the things I want to accomplish. So why would I listen to you? And that wasn't exactly my mentality, because I felt like that was a little disrespectful.
Right, yeah.
But I always was like, let me just try this. If I don't make it, I would give them these sort of like.
Did you ever tell them like one day I'm gonna like make millions of dollars? You guys will see. Like, was there any of that?
No,
kind of thing?
I never did that because, and I know there's some people who preach that.
Right.
No, I never did that for a couple of reasons. Number one, I always felt it was like highly disrespectful. These parents who like toiled over bringing you up and gave up their dreams to like put food on the table. You're gonna throw stuff in their face.
Right.
No, it was always like, please believe in me. Let me just do this, and if it doesn't, I promise you that I'll make this up somewhere else, and and I'll make up for this time that I'm losing. And that's the one thing that they did empower me with, is having the patience to stick around and believe in me. And even though there were times where they were giving me a hard time about it, and it was like they're sort of very Dr. Jekyll and Hyde about this, right? And so there were times where they were like super supportive, and then there were times where they were just like, there's the longest time I didn't
know. It's not too late to go back to school. Yeah.
Well, it was, for the longest time, I didn't even know if they knew what it is that I was doing, because I remember like this was maybe like 6 years ago. And my dad hates when I tell this story, by the way. So both my parents are like fairly savvy people, and they're fairly young. And so I remember I told my dad, I said, "Hey, Dad," and we're changing sort of our marketing tactics. And so I was curious to get like, and my dad was like in this demographic that we were chasing. And so I was like, "Hey, Dad, if you were going to buy a necktie, where would you go?" And like without missing a beat, he goes, "Macy's." I was like, all right, let me rephrase this. I was like, "Where would you go if you had to buy a necktie online?" And he thinks about it for maybe like a split second, and he goes, "Macy's.com." I was like, "Oh man." And like I had this, like I laughed, of course, and I was like, "Why not Ties.com?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, Ties.com." And I was like, "Oh man, I got my work cut out for me." Yeah.
Was there moments for you where you saw them sort of like proud of you, and it was nice to sort of reflect back on the days where they sort of maybe were a little bit doubtful? Is there any kind of good feelings that you've seen from them that sort of fill you up, make you feel really good that you sort of popped out the other side successfully?
Yeah, so I think so we do a lot of company activities with the team, and then our Christmas parties are usually a lot of fun. And so the first company event that I invited them to, they actually came with my in-laws, and I think it was the first time. So we had a fantastic year, and this was a few years back. And like I got up and to give sort of a little talk to everyone, and I think that was sort of like the first time where they were like, "Oh, okay, this kid, he's going places. Yeah. Cheers, that's my son." Yeah. So I think that was one of those moments.
What did that feel like for you to see them proud like that?
I think it was like, in a way, vindication, right? But in a way, it was almost like it made me happy to see them proud, because for them, so much of their sort of like, for better or for worse, so much of their happiness is tied into what their kids do. I have a mother who's a doctor, and so I think that was sort of like a happy moment, and so much of like what I motivated me early on and still does in a way is to make sure that like the people who are around me, the people that care about me the most, and that I care about the most, including my friends, that I'm doing stuff that makes them proud, that they're like, oh yeah, I know Omar. Yeah. And so as long as that I can keep that up on a personal level and on a professional level, that's what matters to me. And that was one of those moments for me.
It's pretty powerful. Have you given your dad a ride in the Ferrari yet? I'm curious to see that one.
Yeah, so it's funny. So my parents, a couple of years ago, ended up moving out of town to be closer to my brother. And it was the first time, so it's been like 18, 19 months since I've had the car, maybe not even that long. And so it was the first time that they came into town, and so I actually took him. He was scared as heck in it. And it's funny because my brother has a Porsche Turbo S, and he goes, that car at least you don't hear anything, because then it's fine. And so yeah, I definitely scared him driving around Long Beach, and then he drove it, which was sort of a very, very happy moment for me.
Wow, man!
What
did that feel like? Like take me to that moment.
The driving part of it didn't do so much for me as his story about it. So my dad's both my parents are fairly educated people. My dad has a PhD, my mom has a master's. But even these highly educated people back home never had access to these kinds of things.
Right.
And he said, growing up, we'd heard about Ferraris. And people would say that, like, growing up, we would hear that Ferraris are the most expensive cars in the world and the fastest cars in the world. And he's like, but there wasn't even a picture for us to look at and be like, and this man has a PhD, right?
Right, yeah.
There's no picture for me to see like, oh, this is a Ferrari. So he goes, I'd always heard about it. And he goes, and 30 some years later, my son is driving one. And so that was
wow.
That was a lot more powerful for me than him, like, driving.
Actually driving.
Yeah. Because he drove it like he could have been driving a Prius. Right?
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
So I do want to ask some other things. I mean, we went deep into a lot of the business stuff.
Sure.
I do want to ask, as an entrepreneur, how important do you feel a daily routine has been? I mean, do you have any sort of things that you found have really helped you? Do you find that it doesn't really matter as much as some of the other things? Do you wake up early? Just a little bit of insight as to your routine as CEO.
Routines are really important. And if your listeners are interested, there's a fantastic keynote. You and I have talked about this, about making your bed. The first thing that you do is make your bed.
Yes, I've heard about
and
that.
maybe you can put a link to that video in this video. But yeah, routines are really important for me. So I wake up every day at 5:30 in the morning.
Every single day?
Every single day.
7 days a week?
Weekends at 8 o'clock. Even
Gotcha.
On the weekends, I have an 8 o'clock. But I don't sleep a lot anyway, about 4.5, 5 hours a night. But yeah, you wake up every single day on a routine. The very first thing I do instead of reach from my phone is that I try to sort of internalize my goals. So I have long-standing sort of life goals that I'd like to achieve. And because I've written them down, it makes it that much more tangible for me, because it's not this pie in the sky. Like, most people have these like very vague goals. I want to become a millionaire.
Yeah, these hopes.
Right?
Yeah.
So I do that. And it's very brief. And then I don't meditate, but I do listen to some calm sort of sounds or music while I go through my morning routine. And then I'll check my email. I check sort of the orders that's coming in. And then I listen to the news and I want to know what's happening. And then cold shower. I take a cold shower. I don't take any hot showers. It hurts a lot more when it's cold outside, but it cuts down on coffee, alerts me right away. It resets my body. I do drink a water bottle, room temperature, every single morning when I wake up.
Same, I do the exact same.
Yeah.
It must be an Omar thing.
It must be, yeah. So I do that. And then on the way to work, I listen to a podcast, Passionate Few.
Hey.
I do, absolutely.
Awesome.
Andy Frisella's, somebody that sort of motivates me immediately. Or I listen to an audiobook, but I usually have about a 35, 40-minute drive to the office. So that's immediately when I walk in. I'd like to get in before everyone else does. And that's not always true because we have a few early risers, even earlier than me.
Right.
So, but when I do come in, it gives me usually about 2-hour window where I can focus on deep work. There's a really fantastic book called Deep Work, but things that are going to move the needle for the company long term.
Right.
And so I work on those projects immediately in the morning when I first walk in. When I'm the freshest, I'm the most awake.
Least distractions from others, emails, all that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And do you notice a radical difference on days where you don't do that for days at a time?
Oh, yes.
Night and day experience.
If there are days where let's say I have a doctor's appointment, or I have a morning meeting, or I happen to have slept in because the night before I partied a little bit.
Yeah.
Then my day is thrown and I walk in and I'm literally like a chicken with my the head cut off, and I'm like running everywhere. Because then like you're taking meetings and you're just back to back, and then I haven't done this first 4 hours of my day, which really feel and I could do a ton. And I tell my wife all the time, I'm like, I don't think my day was very productive. My wife and I always end our days with, was your day productive? And those are the days where I'm like, I don't think it was very productive.
Yeah, achiever syndrome. Yeah.
And it makes me feel really, really guilty. But yeah, like every morning, every night we go to bed, I tell my wife, she'll ask me like, was your day productive? Were you happy with your day? And on days like that, it's almost always a no. But yeah, routines are very important.
Wow. And then I want to ask about Ties.com. What are some future goals you guys have for the company? What's the long-term vision? I know you guys also have products like the Guap Box. You guys have basically monthly memberships where people get different products.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about some of the offerings and going forward, how you guys are expanding with Ties.
Yeah, so our expansion process is inherently different just because of the way the business is built. We don't, because we don't have outside funding, we don't have a ton of products that we can launch all at the same time. However, we're launching shirts in the next 3 months, dress shirts and casual shirts, really aimed at, so Ties.com, and maybe you guys can edit this in the beginning somewhere, but Ties.com is the site that ties your outfit together. So that's the sort of mantra that we follow. Every product that we bring on, it's the kind of shirt that you'd be able to wear to a day like this, but then go out afterwards to the bar and not necessarily feel like, oh, hey, this guy just came from a meeting and that's the outfit he's wearing. So that's going to be our next product line that we're going to launch. What we did was we took a $175 shirt. I won't name the name, but I used to wear these shirts. But we took that shirt, deconstructed it, and then figured out like what is it that makes this shirt so expensive? Material, cut, the sort of like details. And then we're like, okay, well, no matter how much you do this shirt should not be more than sort of $55 to $75 range, and you still can be very profitable doing it. So that's what we did, was we deconstructed some of the best shirts in the industry and then put out all of its element into this one shirt that I'm very, very happy with. So that's what we're going to launch next.
Love that.
Yeah.
And then I have 3 more questions and then we'll wrap up here.
Yeah.
Looking back, what would you have done differently in your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah. Absolutely fantastic question. Get out more. Meet as many people as possible, because you never know what doors it opens. And then you never know what you learn from people, and you can always learn from people. So get out as early as possible. Don't spend all your time going to meetups and eating shitty pizza and shaking hands and passing out your shitty business card. But wow, that was a lot of cuss words.
That's all good.
Yeah. But definitely get out and meet people. Yeah.
And then the second thing is, what do you think? Obviously, you've been in this space, so you've seen a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs. I'm sure you get a lot of DMs, messages, hey, what's your best advice, stuff like that. What have you seen as some of the biggest common denominators, both in terms of the people that don't end up winning in business and then also the people that do end up winning in business? What are some of those common denominators of success and failure that you've seen time and time again? What are the patterns?
People who are entrepreneurs, people who believe that they want something and then don't have the hustle. So if you're just into the hype of being an entrepreneur and putting entrepreneur on your Instagram handle or telling people you're an entrepreneur, look, having one client doesn't make you an entrepreneur. I'm sorry. You're like at best maybe an agency.
Freelancer, yeah.
A freelancer at best, right? So yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, that like being an entrepreneur is one of those elements. And then the other thing is giving up too easily. So I think it's sort of a cultural thing that's happening, cultural phenomenon that's happening. There's constantly this barrage of everyone killing it. Literally everyone's killing it. It like I think I did this
Instagram effect.
With my buddy Mike Smurf and WRX. We like I would literally show him. I'm like, look, here's my wall. Like this person's flying a private jet. This person's driving a Wraith. This person is driving a Lamborghini. This one just crushed it. This one is like going on stage, and this one's in a rock. Like literally, it's all you see.
Right.
So when people do something for even like a brief amount of time, they're like, oh my God, I haven't had any success. They're like, yeah, but how long have you been doing it? Dude, I did it for like 4 months. Nothing was happening. You're like, are you shitting me? 4 months? Like, man, like that means nothing. Like means absolutely nothing. And then the other thing is like, people don't undervalue hard work because there's like this idea that you have to work smart and be smarter. Yeah, this is true. Like, look, we can play nuanced word games all day long, right? But the truth is that nothing substitutes hard work. Like, understanding the ins and outs of your business and really sort of some elbow grease really, really help. I don't know if you were watching my Instagram story the other day. A container pulled up. We had a bunch of people who like were sick. The entire office was back there, and we were unloading a container. Right. And look, I believe hard work is good for the soul. So I'm not afraid to roll up my sleeves and work hard. And I think that's undervalued in today.
Were there any tough times during? Obviously, you worked incredibly hard to get to where you're at. But were there tough times where you felt like giving up, or you were close to the edge, or for you was it always just go?
No. And anybody who tells you otherwise is a fucking liar. I said I wasn't going to cuss. No, yeah, absolutely. And that's only human again, right? It's human to have those emotions. And my wife, who's a fantastic practicing clinical psychologist, she tells me like, look, having these moments of weakness, it's human. It's part of the process. Let it wash over you. Let it be part of the process. Internalize it. Even look, we're so keen on like immediately labeling ourselves anxious or depressed and all that stuff. It's part of life, man. Like acknowledge it, experience it. It's okay to feel sad sometimes. Like my wife will tell me like, look, you're stressed. It's okay. Like it's okay to be a little snappy. It's okay to be a little depressed. It's okay to, and the truth is that, yeah, that's part of the process. Yeah. There were times where I was like, man, like I should just go back to law school or,
right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it happens, like when you're constantly bombarded by like negative things happening, you've spent all this money on this marketing endeavor and it's not working. It's actually just listening to Andy Frisella's story, how they hired, now this guy is in-house, and they were talking about the story where this guy who's a marketing guy who does sort of, they do ads on TV and radio and all this stuff. And so the guy had basically hunted him for like a year and a half. The guy had his agency and was like, let me do this. And so Andy finally just basically broke down and let him do it. You guys should listen to this podcast. It's fantastic. And so the guy, Andy was finally like, whatever, man, let's just do this. So, and they were broke back then and they were spending like $4,000 or $5,000 a month or something like that. It may have been more. And so they did this for like 4 months and they had 0 sales. It was like non-existent. And Andy was like, man, I was so pissed. And the guy even told him, the guy's like, 12,000 is what they were paying. So the guy basically told him, the guy said, listen, I'll tell you what, I know it's been like 3 months. Let's let this ride until the campaign is finished. And if at the end we don't make any money, I will give you back all this money. And the guy was broke. And Andy knew this, right?
Yeah.
So Andy's like, well, you're broke, I'm broke, whatever, dude. Let's just let this ride.
Right.
He let it ride and he said, as soon as those months were over, they were crushing it afterwards, right? So like believing in something and then like sort of holding on to it, that's something special. So
this is what Gary Vee calls, I think, macro patience, right?
Yes.
Micro speed, macro patience.
Yes. Yeah. It's this, and so that's what it really comes down to for me is having some level of like internal patience and say, look, I'm not ready to give up yet, and accepting that it's part of life to have these feelings and these failures. I think makes a huge difference, because I think like immediately people are like, oh man, I'm feeling like down on this. Maybe I should stop, because if I really believed in it, then I wouldn't have these feelings, right? I think we're very quick to say that, but really what that truly means is, look, this is too challenging for me, and I can't really do it, and I'm not strong enough to hold on to it. So I'm just going to let it go. And then at least I can say I tried and failed, right?
Yeah. They're not in it for the long haul.
Right, yeah.
Okay, and last question. Looking back on everything you built, obviously, I'm sure as, achiever syndrome, you still have a ton of goals you want to have.
Yeah.
Looking back, any other pieces of wisdom, insight, if somebody could say to you, Omar, even though you have a long way to go in your entrepreneurial journey, if you could condense Omar's best advice to people out there who are looking to build a business, scale a business, turn a business around, maybe start their first one or second one or third one, what would be Omar Sayyed's best piece of advice if you had 60 seconds to the world on entrepreneurship?
A little bit of success doesn't mean anything. And we talk about this all the time with my mastermind. Part of the biggest problem that entrepreneurs face is a little bit of success. They buy a nicer car than they drive now. They may live in a better apartment than they do now, or they might buy a house and immediately they become complacent. It's sort of like this middle America syndrome, right? Like you do just this tiny little bit, and then all of a sudden that's enough. Your vacations become a little bit longer. You wake up a little bit later. You go home a little bit earlier. Your lunch is a little bit longer, and that sort of drive starts dying out. Don't become complacent with a little bit of success. A little bit of success is not sexy. What's sexy is reminding yourself of your goals and why you got into it in the first place. Like you can be a millionaire, have family, money, and still have a hunger if you understand your goals and you're chasing your goals. Maybe your goals are fame. Maybe your goals are proving to the world something. Maybe it's that you want to put out the best product. Maybe you want to change the game. Whatever it is, as long as you can remember your goals and you can stay hungry, it's never about a little bit of comfort. It's never about short-term goals or whatever. And so the best piece of advice I can give anybody who's starting is knowing that you're going to get results if you follow the sort of formula of consistency, persistence, never giving up, following through, working hard. That'll ultimately lead to some success, but some success is not all the success. And so work hard to get all the success.
And did that ever happen to you? I know that was supposed to be the last question, but did that ever happen to you where maybe you hit a certain point and you sort of chilled for a little bit? How do you intensify that fire?
Man, I fight that every single day. One of the and it's not because I'm saying, oh, I'm successful.
Right. Yeah.
It's because, like you drive a Ferrari, you're like, oh, cool. But then you're like, no, man, like I got to keep this Ferrari, right?
Right, yeah.
That's what worries me the most. Like it's, we're talking about this sort of like success syndrome, but there's also this like imposter syndrome, like, dude, do I really deserve this? Right? There's that hunger. And the problem, and I will say this to anybody who's just starting, the problem isn't getting to the top. The problem is staying on top, right? So for me, that's what it is.
Is it harder to stay on top than to get?
Absolutely, without a doubt, right? Because then everybody's aiming for you, right? It's one thing to sort of like creep up on the one that's on top and like
be king of the world.
King of the world, yeah. But then like staying on top is a lot harder. And so then everybody's aiming for you. But for me, like I do little things, micro hacks, macro hacks in my personal life to make sure that I stay sharp and that I stay hungry and that I stay motivated. The same way I was when I started as an immigrant kid dropping out of school.
Give us one micro hack and then we'll wrap up.
I always drive. So for me, it's cars, right?
Yeah.
And so that
I love
motivates.
how you said cars with an S.
Yeah.
It's a car. It's car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I drive cars that motivate me, and every single day when I get in them. But that's one hack. The other hack I do, this is equally as important. I know you asked for one, but the other thing I do is I put myself, not necessarily foolishly, but I put myself in a little bit of financial discomfort, a tiny bit, that keeps me hungry.
Pressures you, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've always done that.
And it's worked out over the long haul.
Yeah, whether it's buying a watch that really I shouldn't, right? Or it's looking at houses that I really shouldn't.
Yeah.
But then the truth is also, the truth is that, can I share like a quick little story?
Yeah.
So I was reading this article about Jay-Z and Rolling Stones, and he said, when I started really making money, when I thought I had made it, I went out to buy a penthouse in this co-op. It was one of the most expensive places in New York, and I bought it, and I felt like the king of the world. And as soon as the people found out that I was a Jay-Z and that I was a rapper, that these people loved me. And he was like, every single day I would get in, and like little old ladies would be in there with me, and I would press PH, and I would go to a penthouse, and it's like that was me. It wasn't even the PH, but somebody had to like hold down the little card for me, and he's like, my people would do that, and they would press it.
Yeah.
And he goes, but there was always a button that was unmarked, that was below my button. I didn't know what it was. I press it once in a while. I didn't know what it was. But, I lived on the penthouse. What did I care? And he goes, I would go up to my floors, the doors would open, and that was my entire floor. I didn't really care. And he goes, until one day I got in, and he said there was a guy inside talking on the phone and two guys flanking him. And he goes, he was getting off the phone as I was getting in. He goes, and I had my guys with me. He's talking about his bodyguards, and he had bodyguards. And he goes, it was a very sort of uncomfortable moment being in this. He had two bodyguards, I had two bodyguards. And so we're getting in, he's sort of looking at me, I'm looking at him, and he goes, my guy waved his little thing and pressed the button. And he goes, as soon as he did that, I noticed that button that I had never been able to press was lit up.
Yeah.
And so he goes, I'm basically waiting for him to get off at any level now. And the elevator keeps going up in numbers, it goes up and up and up.
Interesting, yeah.
And he goes, we got to my level, and this guy was still on.
So he's going one higher.
The doors open, and he goes, my guys get off, and I refuse to get out because I wanted to see where he was going.
Right.
And so the guy looks at his guys, because his guys are like, hey, are you going to get off? And, Jay-Z wasn't getting off because he was like, I just wanted to see where this was going. And the guy sort of smirked, and he said, no problem. So he's like saying yes to his guys, right, to his bodyguards. So the doors close. He goes, now I'm in the elevator with his two bodyguards and him. And, and he goes, and it shoots up one floor, and ding, the doors open. And he goes, then I realized no matter where you are in life, there's someone above you. And he goes, then I realized it doesn't matter how much money I make, there's always people who make more money. And so the lesson I took away from this, it doesn't matter what you have. And that shouldn't be your goal, is to be the, whatever.
Biggest or best or whatever.
Exactly.
But there's metaphors there for people and whatever that means for them.
Yeah. And the truth is that, look, and that's what keeps me motivated. It doesn't matter what I achieve in my life. I can always do better. And it doesn't have to do with just finances. Just, be a better son, be a better husband, be a better brother, be a better leader, be a better boss, be a better friend.
Anything, yeah.
Whatever it is. And I was recently talking to a friend of mine. He said he wanted to meet up, and I told him that I was busy, that I would meet him at 3:00. And he was sort of driving in my direction. He actually went back home, which is the opposite direction. And then he was going to come back to meet me. And so like later when we were meeting up, I told him, I said, hey, why don't you just come and stop by? He goes, no. I asked you when you were free. He goes, and a good friend will come and meet you when you're free, not when it's convenient. And that makes you think like, hey, like that guy actually is sort of considered and thinks about this, right? Like being a better version of yourself. I like to think, winning at life, like just every sort of aspect. Iterate yourself so that way you're better at everything that you're doing to your best of your capabilities. And so that's the way I sort of stay hungry all the time. It doesn't matter what I achieve. It's not that I'm not thankful. It's not that I'm hungry and I won't. It's just that thinking to yourself like, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, just be happy for what you have. But then also there's more, like you can achieve more. And that's what's so important.
I love that. Yeah, progress equals happiness.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I have to, for the audience, ask one more question.
Sure.
And this is for the entrepreneurs out there that are maybe single or in a relationship or in a marriage. Obviously it can put a strain on entrepreneurship. So as somebody who's married, obviously you have insight into this. And I promise you this is the last question, but I had to do it for you guys. Is, what's your best advice on what's important to look for in a healthy spouse and a significant other when you're trying to build a business? Because it's definitely a unique situation for both parties. So what have you found? Any insight, advice, anything like that?
Yeah. Communication but more importantly, that's because that sounds very vague, but making your spouse feel involved in your journey and in your process. So I share the good and the bad with her, with my wife. She knows sort of like what we're doing, and so then she can buy into it. Then she's part of the process, and she believes in. Just the other day, she was like, "Thank you for making me feel part." And that's constantly because she really feels invested in the process. It helps, when you have an entrepreneur for a spouse, or he comes from an entrepreneurial background, or has parents that are like that. That helps. But the truth is that that has been sort of like my go-to. I wholeheartedly believe that behind every successful man, there's a success. Behind every successful man, there's a greater woman. And the truth is that, and the same is true for a man, that is for a woman. But having a supportive spouse really, really helps. And making your spouse feel part of the process is an important part of your journey.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so in closing, we always play a game called First Things First. I don't know if you know this game. Basically how it works is I'm going to rifle off 10 words or phrases, and then you tell me the first word or phrase that comes to mind.
Okay. I should have really paid more attention to this.
No, it's all good.
Yeah.
The only rule is that you can't repeat yourself twice.
Okay.
Makes sense?
All right.
So I'm going to rifle off 10 words.
Yeah.
You just tell me the first word or phrase that comes to mind.
This is like word association.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
You ready?
All right, let's do it.
All right, first word, ties.com.
Long ways to go.
Second word, struggle.
Every day.
Your goals.
Be a better person.
Your past.
Arduous.
Entrepreneurship.
Hard work.
Money.
Must have it. Not necessary for happiness.
Passion.
Family.
Teamwork.
Above everything else.
Failure.
Part of the process.
And then last one, you ready? Your legacy.
Financial freedom.
I love that. Well, thanks so much for bringing your story. It's an honor to have you on, Omar.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys for tuning into this episode of The Passionate Few. Make sure to click the link below so you guys can check it out on iTunes as well. And we'll see you guys next time. As always, live strong, live with passion, and go chase those dreams. See you guys next time.
If you guys enjoyed that video, be sure to hit that subscribe button right now, because every week we bring you the very best in personal development content, interviews, and insights to help inspire you to take your life and your dreams and make them a reality. And also, if you want to know how to book dream guests the same way I have, you can check the link below for my top 3 secrets. So if you have a podcast or a show or whatever it is and you want to collaborate with them, if you click that link below, I'll give you those top 3 secrets to help you get in touch with anybody. And also, don't forget that The Passionate Few is available on media platforms as well. So you can subscribe to the podcast. And until next time, thank you for being one of the passionate few.